Hey, welcome to another episode of Footnotes. And today our guest is Dr. Kassy Alia Ray. And she's the executive director of Serve and Connect, which is a nonprofit that seeks to build better relationships between local police departments or law enforcement and the communities that they are serving. This is a conversation that goes pretty deep into the how and the why she started that and what their work has been like at a real world level. This may be one of the most important episodes that we've ever shot. No disrespect to previous guests, but I learned a lot in this episode, and I hope you would watch it until the very end and that it would be thought-provoking and maybe lead you to think about some things differently and get involved. Check it out. Well, Kassy, thanks for sitting down with us. We got Kassy Alia Ray here with Serve and Connect here in Columbia. And so, Kassy, let's just dive right in. I mean, you're a nationwide, or you're known around the nation, for Serve and Connect. And so even people that are listening locally have probably heard of you and what's going on. But maybe take us beyond the name Serve and Connect. And let's start with, how did you get started and what was that like?
Yeah. John, thank you so much for having me on and for telling the story of Serve and Connect.
Sure.
It's really exciting to be able to sit here with you and as you talk about how we got started in Forest Acres. So It means a lot. So first, big picture, Serve and Connect. We're a nonprofit that has the mission of fostering positive change through sustainable police and community partnerships. We envision a future where police and citizens are working together as one community to address root causes of violence and to promote safety and thriving for everyone. We believe that together we are better, that what police and communities want at the end of the day is for our communities to be safe, our families to be protected, and our children to thrive. And so Serve and Connect focuses on being the bridge builders, the facilitators, creating the spaces that allow for healing and trust and hope to grow, where police and community can work together. I'm proud of how we've grown. It's crazy when you look back at this journey. So taking us back to how we began, it really started because of my husband, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
So Greg was a police officer, city of Forest Acres, and he was killed in the line of duty on September 30th of 2015. And when you think back to 2015, there was a lot of similarities to what we saw just recently here in 2020. A lot of heightened unrest and tensions between police and the communities they serve, especially traditionally disenfranchised or marginalized communities, just heightening that divide and a lot of fear, a lot of pain, a lot of anger. And 2015 was very similar to that. And it impacted me before Greg was killed. But then when he died, I just remember so deeply wanting to do something about it. That experience, that divisiveness really impacted my experience of grief. I knew that nothing would bring Greg back. And I also, even early on, knew that Greg died what he was called to do, which is to serve his community. Greg was a great man, a great husband, great dad, great partner, and my best friend. And from everything I learned, a really great cop. Being called to serve others was something that he wanted to do from a very young age and was given the chance to do it in the place where he grew up. Over these past 6 years, there has never been one moment where I've ever regretted that he went into law enforcement. And I believe that if given the chance, he would have shown up on that day, even knowing what could have come, because it meant that he was protecting his community. But given the divisiveness at the time, it just made me wonder if other people understood what he had sacrificed, what we had sacrificed. And really that person behind the badge. And I wanted to find a way to bring people together. I just wasn't quite sure what that would be.
How long, and I appreciate you going into exactly, what happened and how you got to this point. Do you remember how long, so after Greg's death, how long did it take for just this idea of Serve and Connect to go into your not just your head, but also into your heart?
Yeah.
How soon did that happen?
So I don't think it was like a cognitive response. Like I didn't know, at the time. So I have my doctorate in clinical community psychology. And at the time I was working on finishing my degree. I was very passionate about the work that I was doing, really focused on community health disparities and really bridging that research to practice gap to help translate all the great things that we know that work to promote community health into action. So there's a lot of similarities now to what I'm doing, but I was passionate about what I was doing. I was focused on graduating from grad school, and I was a young mom. I was 28 years old, and our son, Sal, turned 6 months old the day that Greg was killed. And so it wasn't like I had predetermined this plan.
Mm-hmm.
But within hours, I just started taking action. So I'll never forget, one of the first calls that came in was a reporter from the state newspaper. And he was asking family if anyone wanted to talk about Greg. And I said that I would. And he said that as I spoke, he was surrounded by other reporters who were listening intently because it was very uncommon for people to speak up after tragedy happens in the way that I had. The next call came in. It was Senator Tim Scott, and he said, "Kassy, if there's ever anything I can do, please let me know." And I said that he could speak on behalf of law enforcement, and he was on the Senate floor the next day talking about Greg, telling our story and calling for support for law enforcement. And that's kind of how those first few days went. Anytime there was a chance to speak up, I did. And I did it for a number of reasons. I think, one, I really wanted to humanize this experience of loss. I think far too often we forget that there are real people behind the stories that we hear in the news.
Yeah.
And I didn't want Greg's death to become another tally mark for one team over another.
What do you mean by that? One team over another?
One team, one side. You think about this police or community. It seemed at the time you could either be for police or you could be for community, that there was no middle ground. And when I think back to the news at the time, it just seemed that the framing of those narratives would be plugged as trying to post one side or the other, or fuel the debate on one side or the other. And I didn't want Greg to become a part of that narrative. I wanted to remind people that there was a person who was killed, and here's who he was, and he was loved, and he was a good man, and let's kind of humanize this experience.
Yeah.
And I didn't want Sal, our son, to look back and see hate either. I wanted him to see stories about Greg and learn about who he was. He already asks questions. He's 6, almost 7. And I know one day he'll look back, and I wanted to change that narrative to be more of a loving one than a divisive narrative. And that really was the core of it, like both for Sal, but also for our broader country, to say, kind of break it down. First, let's remember that this was a person, but let's change the narrative here. It doesn't have to be us versus them. There has to be a different way that we can come together. And that seed, that desire to bring people together was really fostered very early on.
So with changing that narrative, I mean, is that where Serve and Connect really came in at first, was just sort of understanding the narrative and then trying to go about bringing some change in there? Or?
So early on, the gut reaction was first, I think, around showing support to law enforcement, was not in a way that made it one team or the other, but just humanized and showed love. And so that was initially how I got started. But over time, as it continued to grow, I realized that if we really wanted to change this dynamic and break down this divisiveness, it had to be much more than that. I just wasn't sure what that looked like. It's a much longer story and a journey, but I learned that I had so much that I didn't understand about why people distrusted police. And I had to do a lot more listening, a lot less talking, And I had to seek to understand that change isn't about being understood. Because there was times where I felt like if people could just see my perspective or hear how I feel, maybe it would help shift the needle. And I think a lot of times we feel that way.
Sure.
We want to be seen and humanized and understood. But what I came to see is that if I really wanted to make change, I had to really seek to understand.
Can you take us into some of those early understandings that came about?
Yeah. It was a pretty pivotal moment that I remember. I was invited to speak on a panel on race relations at the Capital City Club. And it was one of my first speaking engagements. I'd never been on anything like that. And I remember feeling honored and thankful and felt, again, like this was a chance for perhaps people to hear my perspective. I thought I came into it with a pretty open heart, recognizing the position or privilege that I walked into the room with as a white police widow. I felt like I came into it with that open appreciation. But as I spoke, there was a couple in attendance, and I think I just represented a lot of pain for them. And they attacked me, basically verbally. And it was so bad that after the panel, the event coordinators tried to shield me and like pull me through a back tunnel so I didn't have to interact with this couple. But I swung back around and found them. And because I wanted to understand where they were coming from. I wanted to understand if I had done something or said something that upset them, but then also just hear their perspective. And we talked for, I think, like an hour and a half. And I remember walking away just seeing how much I had to learn. That if I really wanted to be effective at driving change forward, I had to do a lot more listening. And that started a big journey for me.
Do you mind going into what you heard from them? I mean,
I think there was a lot to it. I think what I really walked away with in the biggest sense is just how deep the distrust and pain and fear goes, that it goes from its intergenerational trauma that's been experienced that also is reinforced by people's day-to-day interactions, not just with police, but racism in general, both microaggressions and direct experiences. And that was a process of, as a community psychologist and someone who was focused on health disparities, I understood academically the inequities that exist in our country. But I think that personal interaction really just highlighted how much I had to learn about the human experience of what that must have felt like and what the day-to-day was for someone who was experiencing something so much different from me and myself.
So how do you're executive director of an organization that you started through a very personal and traumatic and tragic experience. You're academically trained in a lot of the aspects of what you're doing. And then you were out there in the community, eyes and ears, and your board and even the people that work there are seeing and hearing these experiences like you described. Take us into, how do you take the training, your personal experience, and the gathering and learning? How do you take all that, and then what's the recipe for taking that and turning it into something that creates change?
I wish it was like as simple as creating a recipe that I could say, step one, do this, step two, do this. It was definitely a messy and complicated journey, and something to share that was really a huge aha for me in this process was, alongside this process of listening and learning, looking at research, evidence-based practices, seeing what else is out there. I mean, it's an iterative process, I'd say. It also impacted my own personal experience with peace and Greg's death. Losing Greg was the worst thing that I could imagine going through, especially as tragically as it happened. But being asked what I would want for the life of the man who took him from us was a pretty hateful experience as well. It was like I was doing my best to stay above water and not drown in that grief. And every time I would meet with the solicitor's office and get updates on the case, it was like I was being sucked back in.
Yeah. Wow.
And there was one particularly horrible day where I left just feeling very defeated and not knowing how I'd get through, how I could sit in a courtroom and face this individual who represented so much pain for me and go home and be the mom that I want to be for our son. How I could teach him about empathy and forgiveness and compassion when I was struggling to find that so much myself. And I'll never forget, I had a work trip at the time I was working with the CDC on some consulting. And so I had 3 hours in the car by myself to Atlanta. And I just was racking my brain. Like, how am I going to do this? And there's a lot of different things, I'd done a lot of research on the process of justice and these rational explanations. But really what brought me peace was imagining how I would feel if I were the mother of the man who killed Greg. And immediately I pictured him just like my own son. So filled with hope and possibilities. And I realized that in there how much we had in common, how much we both had lost, that focusing on that end outcome, at this point, how broken we both were and how neither his family nor mine wanted to be there, presumably. And I realized then that the opportunity for coming together was recognizing that common ground. At the end of the day, what we want is for our communities to be safe, our families to be protected, and our children to thrive. And how do we create the bridges that make that possible? And at the core of that really is a focus on prevention and systems change, which is what my expertise in community psychology is. Specifically, I have a lot of expertise on bridging the gap between research and practice, a field called implementation science. We know we spend millions and billions of dollars on research every year. And we know a lot of things that work. But when you take and try to take these evidence-based programs and put them into the real world, there's a huge gap. And I read a study a few years ago that in the health space, only 22% of that research actually gets used. And so there's a big gap. So there was an opportunity to help understand at the core of this common ground, this partnership between police and community is what community policing is supposed to be. Sometimes we think it's about handing out stickers or ice cream cones, but actually it's about partnerships that help address root causes of crime. Mm-hmm. And so really came to an aha that highlighted an opportunity for using my skill set in community psychology and bridging that research practice gap towards this social change. It wasn't like a clean process, though, to connect those dots. Again, another memory I have, I was invited to the first Charleston Forum, which was hosted in memory of the Emanuel 9 shooting. And I was on a panel with D-Ray, who's, national activist. And I remember after that, I had some of my friends who I had gone to school with. And one of them said, Kassy, you did a good job, but you really didn't use your training in that space. Like I had leaned so much just on that personal experience as a widow. And it was kind of woke me up to, how do these skills translate and using them to help facilitate change? So there's not a simple recipe I can share other than it's a process of reflection, of learning, of listening, and connecting those dots over time that have led me to a space where I feel that has really magnified our ability to drive impact and arguably one of the most pressing social issues of our time.
I mean, are these issues, do you think they're solvable?
So, the issue, it looks at what issue that you're talking about. I think this issue of divisiveness and distrust between police and communities, it's a pretty huge mountain to climb. Mm-hmm. It's from the beginning of our country. Arguably, there's spaces where trust has never existed. So to rebuild it, you're building it from scratch. It
implies that it was there to begin with.
But our vision is we believe it is possible if we take a different approach, that it's not us versus them, that we need to shift the paradigm and the way that we view this issue, that it really is in order to achieve those shared goals. If we want to make our community safer, we have to work together. If we want to create racial healing and reconciliation, we have to find ways to come together and sit at the table together. If we want to address some of the big barriers on mental health, we need to come together. Some of the biggest challenges that we're facing require partnership and collaboration.
I think when I hear you say that about coming together, and I've seen this through watching your work at Serve and Connect and some of the things, is you literally mean coming to like at a table together physically, right?
Coming together at a table physically, but importantly, it's also a different way of coming to the table together. Because often people say like we have coalitions, we come together. Often what happens is people come together in a space and they'll report out, give updates. Like, I'm so-and-so from this organization, this is what I do. I'm so-and-so. They're not actually working together as one team in one community to accomplish shared goals. And so we really try to shift the paradigm within a community, shake things up, change the way that police and community partners are used to engaging together so that they really see themselves as one team, one community, one partnership that are working towards shared goals. And they bring different pieces of the puzzle to the table together, but they really see each other as partners, as friends, as collaborators, and they're working together more effectively. And so to your question, can we really solve this? Serve and Connect alone, no, we can't. But what we hope to be is that spark, that impetus that helps show people the pathway out. Because it's, I can't tell you how many times I've been like, well, that sounds nice, but how are you going to do that? So we're working with partners who believe that change is possible. We're collecting the data and we want to say, look at this example in this community, look what they did. Look in this community, look what they were able to accomplish. So it's not one officer, it's not one department, it's not one community, but it's can be replicated over and over again. And hopefully we inspire others to follow.
There's just, this could be like the first 3-hour episode of that we've shot. We're probably going to run out of batteries before we hit 3 hours. But there's so many things there in terms of, so I want to go back to something you said about, these groups come together and people sort of report out and they talk about what they do. And then there's another person that does another thing and all. So do you mean in terms of changing a process where maybe when you get these groups together, and certainly you have experts and community representatives and people with their own experience, but do you mean that they sort of redirect and say, I'm here to solve a similar problem to you across the table or you, and agreeing on like, hey, from my sphere, I'm working on blank. Is that what you mean? As opposed to, hey, we've got 17 different groups here. We've got 17 different viewpoints. We've got 17 different experiences that are being brought in. Or what does that really, for someone that's listening to this, that's maybe they've seen what they've seen on social media, they've seen what they've seen on the news, they may be familiar with your organization, but I think take us into what that really looks like to handle that differently. Because I think everyone's seen, or they can imagine a version of what you're talking about. But paint the picture for us on how it can look different. Like, what are the words that are used? What does it look like?
So I think so often, I think about the past few years when we're trying to create healing in police community relationships. We want to create town halls and panels, and we want to hit this issue head on, and we think we're going to solve it in a confrontational 1-hour panel discussion. But to get at that, we need to be able to have those type of deep, hard conversation. Takes first having trust in relationships to be able to get at those issues and to see each other as human. And so what we try to do is take those small wins and the baby steps to get there. So often what will begin in a community is our entry point is often with the police department, Serve and Connect.
Sure.
Sit down with the police department, start to understand where they're at. What are some of the challenges that they're facing? What are some of the biggest barriers that are coming to light? Do ride-alongs with them. We want to see the community through their eyes, understand what are some of the hotspot areas for crime in a community? Who are some of the key community leaders? How are officers interacting with the community and how is the community responding? From there, often get introduced to community leaders to hear their perspective, do listening and learning sessions, community leader interviews. as that process kicks off, we want to get partners working together on shared goals. So maybe a first win is hosting a community event together and something very tangible and real. So it moves it away from we're trying to solve this big issue of whether or not I trust you, and we're trying to create a positive opportunity and space for the kids in our community. Or we are trying to do a community cleanup, like something very tangible that they can feel and achieve together. And that snowballs into additional opportunities where now they're starting to tackle some of the big challenges. So presently, as you and I are sitting here talking, Omari on our team, who's the lead community organizer, is facilitating a planning meeting with police and community leaders with the North Columbia campus site, where they're planning a peace walk that's really trying to engage youth in a leadership role in addressing violence that's happening, gun violence in the North Columbia community. And so in that meeting, you have different people stepping up. One is helping to lead the resources that are at the table. Someone else's team is helping focused on recruiting youth and helping them shape the different routes and who the speakers are. Someone else their team is helping with marketing, but on those teams include community and police leaders. So they're working together in different ways to accomplish a goal. And through that, they get to know each other, build deeper relationships, and build hope. Tell a story of a resident in that area. So in our work, a big piece is consistency and showing up. Because a lot of times people pop in, take a picture, and leave. And so consistency is very important for trust building and creating that space. So as we started in North Columbia, we hosted weekly meetings in some of the highest crime communities with residents in the area, law enforcement, community partners. So one woman who showed up, starting about the fall of that year, she came consistently for months. Actually, 2 years ago, we hosted the same walk, and then we had to cancel because of COVID last year. And after the walk, she very passionately said with tears in her eyes, "This work can't stop." She was like, "My first meeting when I came in, you don't know this, but it was the day that I planned to take my own life. And because of you, because of this work, everything had changed for her." And she said that before we had started being out in the community, her and her kids were sleeping in one apartment in the back of already a small space because she was afraid of gunfire. But because of the trust that had been built, her kids, they were able to sleep in different bedrooms. And so everyone was getting better sleeps at night. And through that walk, she said she saw a light in her kids' eyes that she had never seen. And she was like, "This cannot stop." And that's the type of impact when you get down to an individual, what change happens when we come together in a positive way.
It's truly unbelievable to me that, like, I'm aware that people may live that way. I don't know a single person that I know personally that lives that way. And to hear that and to think that it's going on, as the crow would fly, 2 miles from my house or 3 or whatever it is, but like inside, the community that I live in is, yeah.
And I don't mean to smile because I'm not
you
smiling
stumped the
about
Footnotes host. That's never happened before, but I'm just sitting. It's like your day job.
I'm not smiling because like the tragedy of what people are living with, but it's like that spark, that aha that you've just had, like I got chills because I'm like, if we're really going to tackle this issue and achieve this cultural paradigm in our country, it takes aha moments like that where we can walk in someone else's shoes. And a big thing that we believe is it takes all of us. We're all pieces of the same puzzle and we need to show up. And so we have a walk on February 20th. Join us, come out. You'll get to know them too. They've become my friends, my partners, my allies, and we are not so different. The only thing different is our zip code. And that is the only thing that divides us. And, just earlier I was in a talk with our Orangeburg partners and we were saying exploring the ways, how do we get the broader community engaged and to care about the kids that are scared for their own life from gun violence. And there's a world for all of us, but we have to see each other as people that are neighbors. And we're just one big world family. I mean, we just got off the heels of Martin Luther King Day, and one of my favorite frames that Martin Luther King had was this concept of the world house, that we've all inherited this big world house, and what impacts one of us impacts us all. And that's really at the core of this. And we're attacking this issue from our own perspectives. But if we can walk out of that and walk in someone else's shoes, it makes the world of the difference. And I really think that we can create healing and real lasting change.
Yeah. So we're going to have to bring you back for part 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 on this.
And I'm so passionate. I know I could talk and talk. I have story after story. I love what I do so much. Yeah. I love the people I get to meet, and I love the change that we're seeing, and it's possible. Yeah.
Well, no, it really comes out when you're speaking, and you've had a front row seat now for a couple of years on these kind of things. And you know, we need people that are doing what you're doing, not just the work part, but also the learning part, because you know, you think about when you learn something, you share it with people. You know, if it impacted your life and you've learned or taken in some information or something that's impacted your life, you're going to talk about it. And I think that in our little micro cultures, or let's call it our zip codes, if you will, we tend to talk about the same things that are going on there. You know, and the thought, like, intellectually, I understand that there are people that are unsafe, you know, or in an unsafe place. But it just sort of stops there. And I think about my own family, and that's not an issue for us and for 99 out of 100 people that I know, probably. But to your point, I mean, in our own communities, when you have people that have such a different life experience, like their everyday life is ingrained in those kind of things. And then you think about how that experience broadens out into a community, and specifically in relation to law enforcement and community relationships and things like that. And again, we see what's on the news, if you will, where it's being reported. And that's not even to say that the whole story is not being reported. I think in 2022, we all know that the whole story is almost impossible to report. And so you have to investigate for yourself. And I think that's what, I mean, I'm learning this like in real time, that you also just don't have to go that far to find it. You know, maybe that's the real sort of footnote here, is that these things are happening in communities that everybody's living in. Every listener of this is living in a community that has these issues. And every listener and person that watches this has a choice to make.
Yeah. It's just the courage to lean in, to listen, and extend open hand, really. And I love that footnote. And I think that's where that process of finding peace with Greg's death was just such a clear example of that. Because, you know, I was 28 years old, 6-month-old baby, married to a 32-year-old cop, finishing grad school. It's not like we had anything fancy, but we were very blessed. Mm-hmm. But it just shows how the outcomes of someone else, how intertwined both of our stories are. And that's happening every day. Like, what happens to one of us impacts us all. And we have to be willing to see that this broader community, they're all our neighbor. They're part of our world family. And we just have to lean in and open up. And I think that's where a lot of magic is going to take place. And I feel like I'm living proof of that.
Well, Kassy, if someone's been listening to this and they've been impacted in a way, and they've got that question rolling around as they're listening of like, okay, what can I do, or how can I get involved? You know, the classic question. I mean, where can they find you? Where can they find your work? Is there a contact us page? I mean, what are those steps that they can take to begin learning? And I think that's where you said, like, start with learning. Just start with being aware. You know, we want to roll up our sleeves and, quote, do something, but sometimes that doing is often easier than even.
Yeah. I think in this world, your point about like social media, digital community, like we are in a world where we want to have the soundbite, the tweetable phrase. Sure. We want to have that answer right away, but really the answer is to lean in and start the process of learning and growth for us all. So we would love if that process includes being a part of Serve and Connect, or just connecting with us to explore what that journey looks like for each person, or you just want to learn more. You can visit our website, serveandconnect.org, or check us out on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Our email is info@serveandconnect.net. Please reach out, and would love to open the conversation.
Thank you so much for sitting down.
Thank you.
We could have talked for hours.
I always love talking to you, John.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, in some ways that I really even didn't expect when I thought about having you on here, but always provoking in a positive way. Thank you for doing something with that pain and hurt.
Thank you.
I mean, it's really unbelievable just to talk to you and to see what's going on. And thank you for sharing it with us here. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor.